You there? Hello. What's up, guys? What's up, guys? What's up, guys? What's up, everyone? We'll get started in a minute. If you want to start queuing up your questions into the chat, that'd be perfect. That'll let us get started, and I'll work our way through from there. Probably get started in about 5 minutes. Right now, we got 15 people in the chat, and I want to get at least a few more people to get us a chance to log in. No good, no good, no good. That's better. I'm just figuring out which of my 3 monitors I've actually got being streamed here. There we go. Okay. All right, so that's what has to go there. 1 second, then, gang. Put this over here. And we should be okay. Put that there. All right, we're going to get started. So like I said, there is a 7-second delay. So as I'm talking to you, what I see on my screen isn't moving yet, isn't happening yet. So expect a delay along those lines. I'm hopeful that the delay includes audio, so that way you're seeing my lips move when you're hearing my voice. If it's working, great. If it's not, we'll work it out. No big deal. Okay, so we're going to do it in order that you guys are asking. Basically, feel free to queue up questions as you want, and we'll go through from there, okay? If anything's going wrong with the chat, if you can't see anything, hear anything, if it sounds funky, if it's not looking right, let me know, and we will go from there. I'm not recording this, so it is what it is. It might auto-record it, actually, I don't even know. But anyway, here we are. 19. I'm losing people. What happened? Anyway. Okay. Let's get rocking and rolling. Protestant Reformation. So, first order of business is, as you know, I'm a big fan of we should put everything in its time and place, right? So, I'm just going to zoom in on this to get it zoomed in on your screen over here. Not that I want you reading Wikipedia articles, it just gives me something to point at, and that's basically why I want to have it in the background. Okay, so first order of business is... What is this? Yeah. We don't want any of this stuff. What the heck? Hold on. Sorry. One of you was asking how to get here. Okay. So, anyhow. So, it's basically the 1500s, more or less. I am wondering why all this stuff is not filled in here, but clearly somebody is doing their absolute best here. Anyhow. So, I'll give the details. All right, so the Protestant Reformation is a 15th century blowback to the Catholic Church in general, and then after that, a wide variety of political issues that the Catholic Church was associated with. So, let's take sort of a brief picture of the Middle Ages, right? So, the Middle Ages begins more or less with the fall of the Western Roman Empire. From there, you get Germanic warlords that build kingdoms like the Frankish state of Charlemagne and so on. From there, those kingdoms sort of solidify after being Christianized into kind of the what you would call normally medievalish kingdoms. Places like the Kingdom of France, the Kingdom of England, the Holy Roman Empire, and so on. Of all those places, the Catholic Church has an extraordinary amount of control, power, etc. Of all those places, the Catholic Church is the one unifying glue of Western Europe. Remember, unlike, say, China, or even unlike the Middle East in many cases, the culture of the Romans never reconstitutes in Western Europe. There's a lot of efforts to sort of reach back into history and pull those things back out, but it doesn't really happen. It never really reconstitutes. Like China always reforms itself along similar lines. That does not happen in Europe. So an example on the AP exam of a good difference between continuities and change, China has a political continuity. Every dynasty tends to kind of rule pretty similarly, right? Even when it's conquered by very weird people like Mongols or Manchus or whoever. Whereas in the west of Europe, you can't even get similar kingdoms right next to each other ruling similarly. Forget remaking the Roman model. So the one thing that glued people together in Western Europe as a common denominator was Christianity. Now, I say Christianity because there was, for a lot of this era, one singular Christian church that splits between the Eastern Orthodox Church and the Western Catholic Church, more or less as things sort of divide, all right? And those divisions are largely political. Remember, the Byzantines in the East had their way of doing things, and it was still Roman in nature, and the West went a very different direction. And eventually, the Pope, the Patriarch of Rome, declares himself to be essentially the head of the Catholic Church, arguing the notion that it is the Roman Catholic Church. It was the one institution that remained from the days of the Romans that had survived the fall of Western Rome. So his claim was, well, I get to pick who's in charge. Now that's how Charlemagne became emperor of the Roman emperor, and how one of his descendant children forms the Holy Roman Empire. The Holy Roman Empire is, and I'll pull that up on a map here for our purposes, is neither holy nor Roman nor very much of an empire, actually. So it's got a very long history, but it's not particularly famous. So here's a map at its height. And you can see the years there, 1200 to 1250. At its height, this is the Holy Roman Empire. And you can see it extends into century, literally where Rome is. That was, Charlemagne had set that up in the 800s. And this is the best it ever was. However, what you're not really seeing is that as time goes on, and it doesn't take much time, within the Holy Roman Empire, the Holy Roman Emperor actually ends up having very little power. He is largely a figurehead title that, figurehead's too strong. He is powerful, but he's nothing more than another feudal monarch. And at the time when say for example, the kings of France, or to a lesser extent the kings of England, were establishing themselves as having more and more centralized control over their feudal states, the Holy Roman emperors were very, very much not in control of large chunks of their feudal states. And this was because they had very strong lords in what we call Germany today, the Holy Roman Empire. And these lords were very fiercely independent if they could be. Remember, here's another continuity in history. Anytime you have a system of power, local leaders will resist the power of central leaders. That's simple. It's universally human-wide. You will see this. So a Holy Roman Emperor has a very fancy title. However, he's holy only because the Catholic Church said one of their distant ancestors, this guy Charles the Great of France, an illiterate barbarian monarch, because he helped save the popes, but is now the Pope's friend, and the Pope gives him this title. A title that the Pope had no legal authority to convey. Remember, there was a Roman emperor. He was living right over here in Constantinople. You can watch my mouse. And there's absolutely no reason whatsoever that the Pope had the right to grant any Roman titles. He just made that up, like literally out of nowhere. It's like me calling, I don't know, I'll call Karen Maguire Queen of Shoreham. There. Why? Because I get the power to do that. Who says so? I choose to say so. If everybody believes it, it's true. And that was effectively what had happened. Now, what does that got to do with the Protestant Reformation? Over the years, the Catholic Church's power grows and grows and grows because it is that glue. It grows to probably its extreme height at the start of the Crusades. So say 1100 CE, the Pope Urban calls for this French group of nobles to make their way into the region of actually Constantinople and engage in war on Islam in a dual attempt to, well, kind of many things, but we'll take them all one at a time. One, protect Constantinople from invading Muslims, which is what the Byzantine Emperor had requested, what started the whole thing. Two, to export internal European violence, stop having Christian fight Christian, stop having Christian pillage other Christian villages. Instead, why don't you guys go and kill some non-Christians, because then you stop killing ourselves. Remember, the exportation of violence is a common thing. We see the Christians do it in the Crusades. We see the Mongols do it under Temujin. We see the Arabs do it under Muhammad. You cannot keep a warrior class internally unified if you don't give them something to make a living on. If your job is a professional murderer, then you need things to murder that won't upset the apple cart of your society. The only way to do that is to direct your warrior people at some target. So in the case of the Crusades, it was the Middle East and the Muslims. In the case of the Arab unification under Muhammad and Abu Bakr, it was the Persians and the Byzantines. In the case of Temujin, it was anybody and everything in sight. So that's a common trend. You see this all the time. The exportation of violence is very, very, very typical. You see similarities of this across history. So that's the height of the church. The problem is, from that point forward, the church's power diminishes. I want to make a distinction. Not the Christian faith. Faith in Western Europe was as normal as saying you sleep, you eat, you breathe, you have faith. It was not an option. Atheism, things like that were not even not a thing. So everybody had a Christian faith. That was going to happen. The bigger issue was, what was the role of the church in that? And the church had, frankly, effed up a whole bunch. The Crusades were a total flop. The Black Death follows shortly after. They can't do anything about that. It just runs through all of Europe. There are popes. There are multiple popes at the same time, all with different armies, all claiming to be popes, some of whom aren't even in Italy, some of whom aren't even Italian, some of whom don't even speak Latin. Many of the church's higher members have families and wealth, and there wasn't a thing about the church that looked legitimate to the eyes of anyone looking in on it. Fast forward to the 1500s, and in the relatively independent states of the Holy Roman Empire, there were a large university community. For its era, it was a large university community in the traditions of the Northern Renaissance, and a pastor, a professor of theology, and a monk named Martin Luther, not a black guy from Alabama. Martin Luther, the white guy from Germany. Do not confuse the two. One's an American civil rights activist. That's Martin Luther King Jr. This is Martin Luther. Martin Luther ends up going and questioning what the church teaches as the role of the church. And he does this on a very simple metric. He's a scholar, so he reads the Bible and knows the Bible, probably better than any other churchman knows it. Or at least very few churchmen of any elevated position would have sat and read the entire Bible. If you recall, lots of nobles bought positions for their kids in the church. Those kids didn't study to be priests. They got a position to be a bishop, and they bought it. So they're not really scholars. This guy was. He knew his documents. So he challenges the church's legitimacy along 95 theses. You guys struggle to write one. 95 separate argumentative statements about what the church does in practice that is not found or does not conform to biblical teachings. So you can kind of view him as a fundamentalist. He says the only thing that matters is the Bible and what was said in the Bible. That's it. Whatever rules you make up, that's totally the doing of the church. So things like priests can't marry. Well, we know, as historians, priests couldn't marry because it would create primogeniture inheritance issues among noblemen in Europe. You didn't want to have a man who was pledged to the church inheriting your lands, because if he did, then that would take the lands out of the control of your family. So the rules had to be created to stop that. So things like you can't inherit property, you can't get married, you can't have kids. These were mostly done to protect the political, worldly, secular side of where many of these upper level churchmen came from. They came from noble families mostly. So this was really the issue. Luther challenges the whole thing, up to and including challenging the very existence of the Pope himself. Normally, something like this would have gotten you arrested and burned, beheaded, tried. Something horrible would have happened. However, Luther did this in the one place of Europe you can get away with it. Because in the Holy Roman Empire were a number of noblemen, aristocrats, who were very keen on keeping their independence from the Holy Roman Emperor. The Holy Roman Emperor was absolutely backed up by the Catholic Church. The Catholic Church says, basically, we want this guy. After he, I'm simplifying here. He goes out, he gets into a number of different debates publicly with active churchmen, and he just gets more and more extreme in his views at times, compared to traditional church teaching. So at some point, the church wants him to come to Rome and answer questions, which is another way of saying you're not going to ever get out of Rome again. He refuses. Not only does he refuses, but there were noblemen of the Holy Roman Emperor, there were noblemen of the Holy Roman Empire, Germanic princes we call them, who hid him, would move him from town to town, from German state to German state, so no one could figure out where he was, in order to shelter him. Not because they liked him, not because they were particularly keen on being members of his new way of thinking, but because his way of thinking questioned the authority of the Pope. And if the Pope has no authority, then the people the Pope said deserve the title of emperor have no authority, right? And that means their boss, the Holy Roman Emperor, has got no authority. In which case, I'm a free prince to do whatever the hell I want. So that's why they bought into the system. This leads to a significant amount of bloodshed in Europe, where Catholic Protestant versus there's no Catholic Protestants. We're Catholic Christians versus Protestant Christians. Luther's particular form of Christianity becomes Lutheranism, but the very different divergent thinking patterns of Christianity that emerge from this era are largely as a whole called Protestantism. So if you're not a Catholic Christian, you're probably a Protestant unless you're an Eastern Orthodox or a Russian Orthodox or a Greek Orthodox Christian. All the rest are a form of Protestantism. They are Protestant. They protest against the teachings of the Catholic Church. So a Protestant pastor, for example, there are no priests, a Protestant pastor can get married, can inherit property, can do all these things, because Luther said there was nothing in the Bible that said they couldn't. Jesus had never said they shouldn't, etc. If anything, Jesus, go forth and multiply. Like, what the hell are you talking about? Was sort of his attitude. So that's the large, somewhat detailed but large overview of the thing. It results in a split. This split will have ramifications, but a lot of them are European history centered, and you won't get questions on them. Things like England becoming a Protestant country, things like the power of the church in general waning. You might run into something about the Counter-Reformation, which is not something we call it anymore. There was a series of what's the word for it? A series of, I wouldn't call it reforms really, but we'll call it reforms. A series of reforms in the Catholic Church to follow the emergence of this new thinking pattern. However, they weren't really counter to Luther's arguments. If anything, the church doubled down. The church said, no, we have the right to set the agenda on Christianity because we have the historical pedigree that says we do. So even if Pope Jim and Pope Ted and Bishop Bill are kind of crappy, our tradition as a church outweighs all that. So they had what was called the Catholic Reformation, which was actually the Catholic Church getting together and doubling down and making more ironclad their theological arguments. They don't actually reform their thinking to accommodate Protestant views. They don't. They go the opposite. They double down on it. So that's sort of their attitude. And like I said, there's religious wars that break out in Europe along these lines for the next several hundred years. So that's the largest and the shortest version I can give in the time allotted. All right, if it didn't help, mention in the chat, but we'll go from there. Let's do Boxer Rebellion. Okay, Boxer Rebellion. That one Wikipedia can definitely help us with. The Boxer Rebellion goes along with the Taiping Rebellion. So here's some pictures. Pictures are fun. So the Boxer Rebellion is basically largely 1900. It's not a particularly long rebellion, and you don't really make any sense of it unless you understand the Taiping Rebellion first. Let's start with the Taiping Rebellion from a little bit before that. The Taiping Rebellion begins in 1850 and lasts for about, as you can see, 14 years. The Taiping Rebellion was the bloodiest rebellion in human history. More people die in the Taiping Rebellion than any other rebellion ever. Sparing you a lot of details, a probably insane Chinese scholar who failed to pass the Confucian exam, so I guess he's not a scholar, gives up and decides that instead of all that, he's actually the Chinese brother of Jesus, come to Earth to establish a Chinese Jesus Christian kingdom. No, I'm not making any of that up. He legitimately thought he was the brother of Jesus. This guy was a complete nut. So, unfortunately for everybody, really, his philosophy was not so important. What was important was he was not a traditional Han Chinese. He was a Chinese called Hakka. Hakka are like from the sort of Yangtze River Valley basin north of there. They're kind of between the Han and the Yangtze rivers. Don't worry too much about it. But basically, they're like a cultural minority in China. So what they did is he starts calling for a rebellion, sparing you a lot of silly details that don't matter for this test. The rebellion gets steam and succeeds. Now, he's hitting the Qing at a time when the Qing is literally about to get engaged in the Second Opium War. They've just gotten beat by the First Opium War within the past decade. Opium addiction is a problem across China. European countries have established spheres of influence. The British have large-scale control of the Yangtze River Valley, and so on. So this thing really takes off. In fact, I'm sure there's a map in here of it. Yeah. So these areas, these territories down here, are actually, if it's not this kind of, I don't know what you want to call this, flesh color. I don't know what to call this. This like tan color, yellowish, brown, whatever. If it's anything other than that, those are Taiping territories at one point or another. So it is a disaster, frankly. I mean, honestly, it was a total disaster. So, the Qing government was unable to stop them. It got really bad. Like I said, went on for 14 years. They even seized a couple of major cities. Nanjing in particular was quite a serious thing. Hebei is another serious city. But Nanjing was the southern Chinese capital. That was a big, big thing. He actually ends up establishing his sort of kingdom headquarters, his capital there. And he holds the thing for over a decade. I mean, it's pretty bizarre. But he does. Eventually, because of course he's Chinese Jesus, right? He gets it in his head that he should reach out to the Europeans who are here and say, listen, let's have a meeting because I feel like as the brother of Jesus, you and I have a lot in common and we would probably get along. And wouldn't you like to help me topple the Qing government and I'll become the new emperor? And as a Christian Chinese emperor, by the way, did you know I'm the brother of Jesus? We would be good friends and it would be in your interest to help have a Christian emperor in China and it'd be my interest to be emperor. The British, the French, the others, the Germans, the Russians, they actually listen to this. They go, well, it's not a crazy idea. It might actually be better. Let's meet with the guy. So they meet with him. They emerge from the meeting, and the first thing they do is go to the Qing government and say, you guys are useless. This guy's nuts. We're going to help you beat him. So the Europeans actually help the Qing beat Chinese Jesus, and eventually they do. It's a massive, ugly, bloodshed rebellion, but it really demonstrated that, in fact, the Qing had no power left. The only Chinese forces that have any success are actually not the Qing forces. What happens is a lot of noblemen who live around, like like wealthy Chinese scholars, high level bureaucrats who live around the Yangtze River Valley and always have. It's like Malibu. It's like rich people live there. And they establish their own armies. They lead their own armies. They command their own armies. They forget the Qing, the hell with them, and they do their own thing. And they're pretty successful against the Taiping. So were the Europeans, obviously. The Qing themselves more or less did nothing. Now, fast forward, that's sort of one nail in the coffin. The Opium Wars are another nail in the coffin. The final nail in the coffin was the Boxer Rebellion. So the Boxer Rebellion happens about 30 years later. And the Boxers were kind of like I don't know, here you go. Here's a Boxer, sure. Okay. That's obviously like a wax statue. Now, the word Boxer comes from the fact that Europeans saw these guys as Chinese Shaolin-style monks who engaged in what you would call kung fu, some sort of martial arts, right? To the Europeans, the only unarmed combat they had was called boxing and wrestling. That was it. These guys were clearly not wrestling. They weren't grappling. They were punching, kicking, and so on. So they called it Chinese boxing. So as a result, this was the European name for it was the Boxer Rebellion. They didn't call themselves boxers. The Europeans did. And at first, they're an Qing group. They want to see, they're led by these spiritualists who claim that bullets can't hurt them. In fact, the leaders of this rebellion stage elaborate demonstrations. They go into small peasant Chinese villages in the rural countryside. They go, all right, watch. We can beat anybody. We can beat the Europeans. No one can kill us because we're impervious to bullets. Watch. And so a guy will stand there, and one of his boxer buddies will get a musket and fire it at him. And the guy will fall down and there's a bunch of smoke and flame and get up and go, look, I'm totally fine. See, here's the bullet. Now, in reality, of course, it's a scam. The guy's holding a bullet. The musket was empty. You can shoot a musket and have a bunch of smoke and flame come out and there's no bullet in there. I've done it many times myself. It was a scam. It was meant to encourage people to join their movement. Of course, if you learn the secrets of the boxers, you too will be bulletproof, right? This was the argument. And they tried to topple the Qing government. Remember, the Qing are Manchus, man. They're not Chinese. These guys, they're viewed by everybody as like an outsider group. The last Qing empress, the last real Qing ruler, the Empress Shi, which I'm sure I could find a picture of at some point here if I keep looking. She ended up negotiating with the Manchu. Not the Manchu. She is a Manchu. She ended up negotiating with the Boxers. And what her negotiations were pretty simple. She says, look, you don't want to come get us. What you want to do is get rid of the foreigners. Get rid of the foreigners and we'll have China for Chinese again. So that's what needs to happen here. And so, and I'm just scrolling. If this is giving you a headache, I apologize. I guess I'm not going to find any quick pictures of her. But I've shown you her in class, I believe. If not, I'll just show it to you right now. So she was able to, there she is. She was able to convince them to attack Europeans, and they do. At this time by now, Europeans have a foothold in these regions, and more than just a foothold. There are small communities, particularly like missionary communities, priests and their families, and a couple of converts and other European missionaries who have established little villages in China. And they're educating and they're schooling people. People like the Jesuit order, things like that are here. And these Boxers fall on these little villages and just decimate them, murder them, execute them, spears, sword, gun, whatever it is, and they massacre these European civilians. The Europeans naturally are not going to have this. The European governments, the European armies there tell Miss Queen here, you need to get your people under control. We're not going to allow this. Like, they just massacred our people. And her attitude was, well, I can't. You know how it goes. I lost to the Taiping were a problem. You guys were a problem. We're kind of busted. If you want to help, I guess you can help stop them. Go ahead. And her master plan was maybe the Boxers and the Europeans kind of grind each other into dust. And then when it's all said and done, her army, her Qing army, can kind of beat everybody and China's free again under her control. This is psychotic. It's not going to work. She was delusional in terms of what she thought she could do. She had been her entire rule, actually. The net result is she starts funding the Boxers from behind the scenes, giving them arms, equipment, funding, whatever they need, food, trying to do this in a way that's sneaky so the Europeans don't catch on. Well, the Europeans do catch on. They do catch on that she's actually helping the Boxers, at which point the jig is up. In a last desperate attempt, she actually has Qing armies join the Boxers to fight the Europeans. And at this point, the Europeans have frankly had enough. They've been dealing with this stuff since the Opium Wars. From their opinion, enough's enough. They actually get a multinational army in place. British, French, German, Russian, I think even American, in fact, yes, American, troops on the ground, boots on the ground against the Chinese, and it's a bloodbath. The Chinese have no chance. You're fighting modern armies, frankly, ready for World War One. They're a decade out from World War One, right? These guys are not going to lose here, and they just steamroll through the Chinese, frankly. As a result of this, the Chinese are the Qing government is dethroned. She's basically put under house arrest. She has a little, at this point, I think he's like 9, boy who's supposed to be the emperor. He's the next one in line. He's too young to rule. They actually take him and chuck him into a monastery to become a monk. He lives the rest of his life as a monk, as a gardener in a monastery. That's where the last emperor of China ends up. And at that point, the Europeans more or less kind of run a slight puppet government, kind of, until 1910-ish, when a Chinese Republic movement, a movement to create a constitutional China, catches on, and the Europeans are kind of happy to turn that process over because, frankly, they're all thinking about World War One at that point. So that's the Boxer Rebellion, and that's the thing that will lead to, eventually, Dr. Sun Yat-sen, who we talked about. It leads to the nationalist government of Sun Yat-sen, which eventually has to come into conflict with the Chinese Communist Party, and eventually the Japanese, and when it's all said and done, the communists win. The government that was running China 1910-ish ends up in Taiwan, and the communists end up running China until the modern day. All right? So let's see. Can we go over... I just whistled into a microphone. I'm sorry about that. Can we go over Zheng He? Yeah, sure we can. Zheng He, right? So Zheng He is easy to remember. He's got no junk. Zheng He's got no junk. So here's our boy. There he is. That's a Chinese statue of him, at least. So let's take a look at it. Here he is. That's probably the most famous statue of the guy. All right. So Zheng He famously was the admiral of the Ming Navy during the early Ming Dynasty. His emperor at the time, I forget which one, the Daoguang Emperor, I think. I'd have to look it up. Hang tight. We'll get there. What emperor did you have here, dude? You had Yongle, right? The Yongle Emperor. So the Yongle Emperor sends him on a mission to more or less reopen trade and tribute systems with everybody along the Indian Ocean Trade Network. This was an anomaly. I want to be clear about this. We've had questions about this. The Chinese, although they are connected to the Indian Ocean Trade Network, do not actually send merchants out into the Indian Ocean Trade Network. Please remember, China is an ethnocentric state that names its own country Zhongguo, which means the Middle Kingdom. Middle here means middle of the universe. They view everything else in the world as not important. Only what China makes is important. Only what China does is important. Only Chinese people are important. Everything else, even if it is objectively better than what they do. And to be fair to the Chinese, they did invent and were leading sort of a bleeding edge of world history. For most of world history, they were there. So they were a leading state and have been for basically ever. But even when faced with stuff that's clearly not as good as their stuff's clearly not as good as some foreign stuff, they ignore the foreign stuff. They just will. They don't care. It doesn't matter. It's not Chinese, it's not good. So Zheng He is a weird case for a lot of reasons. One, he's a slave. He was a eunuch, which meant that he had been castrated in service to the emperor. Okay? So that makes him a slave in Chinese society. Two, he's a Muslim. Now, how did Muslims get to China? You need to know this. Muslims got to China because Temujin, when he conquered China, and there have been some small Muslim communities before this, but Temujin, when he conquered China, brought a whole bunch of Muslims into China to help him run the place because he didn't trust the Chinese to run the stuff, right? So at the low levels of government, you still had Chinese. At the upper levels of government, he brought in Persians and others from Central Asia, almost all of which were Muslims. So Islam, it's not a huge religion in China, but it's there. There were Islamic populations and even Islamic Chinese. Zheng He is one of these Islamic Chinese. So he ends up becoming a member of the emperor's household. I told you that eunuchs often, the emperor's household, if you were a male and you were going to be in his household as a servant, a friend, an advisor, you had to be a eunuch because we couldn't have a situation where no one knows who made this baby. right? It has to be only one guy here has got the necessary equipment to make a child. So that's why that was done. Anyway, he's also the emperor's buddy. The emperor has, for whatever reason, very un-Chinese attitude towards the outside world. So he sends a large fleet of ships, very large, larger than the world had ever seen sail at that point, out into the world to visit neighboring and distant lands, establish Chinese dominance by saying, hello, we're here, we're back, Mongols don't rule us anymore, China is back, and we're accepting trade again. If you'd like to come remind us how cool we are, we would, of course, be willing to accept your money and let you trade. That was the old tribute system. So this was a dual-purpose mission. Tribute system needs to get reestablished because the Mongols are out, the Ming are in, the Ming are Chinese. And remember, this sort of the theme of the Ming was more Chinese than Chinese. It was like we have a vision in our head of what we think China was in its greatest times, and we're going to recreate that because the Mongols really set us back. And to a certain degree, it was like, I don't know what's the word for it. It's like sweet tea, but put extra sugar in it. It's like it's too much. It's overly done. And this was kind of along those lines. But Chinese do not venture out of their borders to go see what the hell's going on in the rest of the world. And that's what made this unique. And this emperor did show a considerable amount of interest in what he being Zheng He here, found, who he talked to, whatever. And there were 7 of these voyages. They were quite extraordinary. And, I'm sure there's a map or two if I scroll around and click down. These are some Chinese inscriptions at the time. There's the emperor. There's usually a map of the voyages. There's actually usually a lot of maps. Here you go. This is the 7th voyage, which, a lot of these voyages, they ran around similar lines. But you can see he went all the way up into Mecca, Medina, probably personal journeys because he's a Muslim. Figured, let's get that Hajj out of the way while I'm over here kind of thing, because not too many Chinese Muslims are going to make it to Mecca. And basically the entire Indian Ocean trade network. What is interesting about Zheng He and these voyages is that they were an anomaly. Often history teachers teach them as typical behavior because at the same time that this is happening, 1400s, right, 1500s, at the same time this is happening, Europeans are exploring. So this tends to be shuffled into an attitude of, oh, the whole world's exploring. Isn't that grand? No, this was an anomaly. Chinese do not do this. And in fact, after that 7th voyage, they don't ever do it again. Not only did they not do it again, they destroy the treasure ships that were built to do this because the thought was those resources were needed. These are humongous ships. These large treasure junks were enormous ships. There were massive resources invested in them, actually physical, wood and timber and things like that. And the thought was this all needs to be broken down and all these resources need to be shipped north because we need to rebuild the Great Wall like it's ever been built before because the Mongols are still out there. Just because we pushed them out doesn't mean they're not coming back. And the modern Chinese Great Wall was actually done during the Ming as a part of the northern defenses of China, worried about a potential reemergence of a Mongol threat. So that's Zheng He, largely. Ghana is independent and the Soviet Union related Afghanistan. Okay. Ghana. So let's talk about Ghana for a moment. There's 2 Ghanas in the course. Neither one of which is particularly important, but we'll go there anyway. There's Ghana of the Ghana-Mali-Songhai trade. Okay, that's Ghana. Ancient Ghana. Let's see. Yeah, cool. Now this list here is not to be assumed. This is not all at the same time. Okay, this is not contemporary to each other. All right, in other words, Ptolemaic Egypt did not exist at the same time the kingdom of Mali did. All right, they're not the same time period, but they're just showing you they were kingdoms. So Ghana was right here. You see Empire of Ghana? That's Ghana. Okay. Yeah. Now, that's not to be confused with the modern nation of Ghana. So if you look up decolonization of Africa and we do Ghana, it's spelled the same. I don't know if I'll be able to find Ghana. List of countries. Ghana. It's right there. So here's Ghana. Ghana here. This is the Republic of Ghana. Map, please. Map, please. Where the hell is the map, please? So it's not near the same place. It's on the Gold Coast, which I'll try to show you. It was once called the Gold Coast, actually. That's probably giving you a headache. I apologize. Oh, here we go. So Here's Gold Coast. This becomes Ghana. Okay. Ghana is one of many nations, of which you see basically all of them here, that were part of the British decolonization. Basically, largely, the British, more or less, after World War II, say enough's enough. And they realize that if you actually count the numbers, British colonies actually cost the British Empire more to run than they actually earn the British Empire. So there's this idea that British colonies or colonies in general were a net financial win for the home countries. Not really true. It was a net financial win for some private companies, some businesses, some industries who definitely benefited from it. But the idea that the government themselves benefit in the end, only insofar, and this is a legit benefit, that British culture was spread around the world. The reason why English is the world's dominant language today has probably more to do, definitely more to do, with British imperialism than American supremacy since World War II. So this is a huge contributor to world history here, no doubt about it. And British culture being spread to all these countries definitely created at least a plausible system of democracy that tended to exist among all of them. All right, this was a sort of a real issue that did in fact matter. Okay, so speaking of Gold Coast, Ghana was not a particularly good success story here. The guy who, this guy, who was sort of the leading decolonizer behind the independence of Ghana, Kwame Nkrumah, ends up not being a particularly good guy. He kind of ends up running the place like an authoritarian. He's not a cool dude at all. I would not worry too much about anything specific to this place or this guy coming up, other than it's just another example of the British getting the hell out and leaving a country in the hands of the local people. Now, that process, as a general thing, usually is pretty ugly. More or less, wherever Europeans pick up and leave from their empires, they leave behind something like a bloodbath. There's a reason why Africa is a disaster today. It's not solely the fault of Europeans, but Europeans drew the maps. Europeans left it in the state it was in. So you get a lot of intercommunal violence where a person who is, by theory, Ghanan, according to this new definition of this country, is supposed to live together. However, as you saw with Rwanda, just because the Belgians came and they picked a certain group of Rwandans who looked to the Belgians more attractive, taller and fairer skinned, and were given special status, and then were given a fake racial group called the Tutsis, doesn't mean that that's reality, or that when eventually the Belgians leave, there's no consequences. As we saw, the Rwandan majority, under the leadership of extreme Hutus, ended up murdering those Tutsis generations later. So that's a clear legacy of imperialism, right? So if you're looking for negative outcomes of imperialism, those are pretty obvious. On the other hand, I don't want you to ignore the positive outcomes of imperialism. Objectively speaking, technologies like industry, railroads, communication networks, telegraph at one point, phone lines at other points, modern education, modern medicine, Enlightenment thinking. This did come with European imperialism as well. So imperialism is a mixed bag. It's not a win, it's not a loss, it's a little bit of everything. And certainly depending upon how it was sort of utilized by the country as it was left, behind, you get a whole different set of consequences that will come out of that. Okay, so it's a little bit hard to know for sure at any given time, but I wouldn't worry too super much about him. The Soviet Union relating to Afghanistan. So the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan is effectively the equivalent of the United States invasion of Vietnam. Very, very, very similar. The Soviet-Afghan War, more or less, sparing you some details, happened. First, it's pretty late in history. It goes from 1979 to 1989. This is still going on when I'm 9 years old. Okay, I was born in 1980. Basically, the United States funded what we now call the Taliban, which is the sort of Al-Qaeda terrorist-friendly organization that ran Afghanistan at the time of 9/11 and had sheltered Osama bin Laden against U.S. demands to have him. They were at the time Mujahideen, what you see there, the Mujahideen. Mujahideen were basically, I don't know what you want to call them, freedom fighters, terrorists, it depends on who you're asking. And the United States trained, funded, and equipped them, including the CIA trained them in like guerrilla warfare tactics, espionage, roadside bombs, stuff like that. in order to resist Soviet occupation. This worked very well for the United States at the time because these fighters were actually able to resist the Soviet occupation. The Soviets were eventually forced to withdraw from Afghanistan in a similar vein to the U.S. was eventually forced to withdraw from Vietnam when it was clear that American will to win the Vietnam War was simply not there. In this case, the Soviet economy was in free-fall collapse, and this enterprise was just showing, one, how expensive war was, and the Soviets really couldn't afford it, and two, how weak, in fact, the Soviet Union had become. Because really, they're talking about, historically, Afghanistan is not an easy place to conquer anyway, but regardless. So, that's this conflict. It ended up being a major blow in the world prestige as well as the pocketbook of the Soviet Union in the closing years of the Soviet Union. So, I would say that that's largely its biggest legacy. Do we need to memorize the kasta system? So the kastas system, right? Kastas. All right. The kasta is the system. The kastas are each of these little racial categories. I'm not sure what you mean by memorize it. Do I expect you to know what the hell a Lobo is? No, I don't. And neither does anybody else. What you should know, though, is where it comes from. So this is the New World Spanish system put in place to deal with the implications of racially impure peoples, right, in air quotes, impure peoples, among the populations of the New World. And it was a caste system. The word is the Spanish for caste. So just, again, caste system, we tend to think India instantly. It's not. Caste, the word caste is your English word. It's not it's a European word. It's not a native Indian Sanskrit word, all right? It just means you're born into a class, the caste. You're cast in this mold. And as you can see here, there are mestizos, mulattoes, Espanol, etc. And it's like all these weird rules, right? So, as we went over in class once upon a time, if a Spaniard is with, right, Espanol with India, if a Spaniard is with an Indian, what is an Indian? An Indian is a native New Worlder, Native American. Why are they calling them Indians? Because Columbus thought he was in the Indies, remember? So he called everybody Indians. It stuck. So if the Spaniard is with an Indian, the baby they pop out is a mestizo. If a mestizo later marries a Spaniard, the baby they pop out is a catizo. If a catizo later marries a Spaniard, congratulations, we made a Spaniard again. It's like you got a shiny Pokemon. I don't know exactly how else to describe it, but that's what it is. It's a racial system meant to make very, very, very distinct delineations between who's racially more important and then what the political rights come with that. The most important thing, and I saw someone ask about Latin American independence here, so we're going to tie that right into this. So who was asking about that? Latin American was KDS. Okay, so let's tie the Latin American independence into this conversation because they're completely related. One group you don't see pictured here are Creoles. Creoles are a white Spaniard, Espanol, who is married to or the progeny of a white person who had two white Spaniard parents. But a Creole was a white person born in the New World. A Peninsulare was a white person born in Europe. So, if you were a child and you popped out of your mom's legs in Spain, you were a Peninsulare. If you were a white kid who popped out of your mom's legs in Mexico, you were a Creole. This is going to create bloodshed. If you're looking for comparisons in history, this is kind of comparative to the French Revolution. Somebody mentioned that too. Or at least history of France. So here's the comparison. When you have somebody who is in a system and you tell them the system is based on race, as you could see, the system is very based on race, and they're clearly white, and they have other whites who are clearly getting more privileges, and the only difference is where one of them was born, you can understand the second-class white citizen getting very aggravated at this. A Creole looked the same to a Peninsulare. They were the same. They were white people, okay? They spoke the same language. They had the same accents. They were educated in essentially the same way. They were often of equal wealth, economic status. These were rich white people born into either the New World, if they were Creole, or the Old World, if they're Peninsulare. But the Peninsulares had more rights. And the Creoles did not like this. Eventually, this issue will lead to Latin American independence movements. The vast majority of the Latin American independence movement was begun by educated Creoles who said, wait a minute, Enlightenment thinking tells us that there shouldn't be any distinction between racial categories, that slavery is no good, John Locke, natural rights, right? None of these things should exist. The Enlightenment is such an important piece of European history, but this is not a European course. But the effects of it on other places is very critical. So the idea of natural rights, life, liberty, and property, right? You can't have a slave. It's not possible. You're violating people's natural rights. This is wrong. Okay, well, if being a slave is wrong, then any racial judgment is wrong. And if I'm a educated white person and you're telling me you're an educated white person, but we're all white and beyond that I'm educated, I have every right to have full rights within my colony of Brazil or the new world of Spain, New Spain, as anyone else would have. So therefore I demand those rights. And this leads to violent uprisings, frankly, where led by these educated white Creoles, largely, not always. Mexico, for example, has a long history of priests and lower class people leading revolutions. But in like South America, Simon Bolivar's revolutions, things like that. Under the idea of establishing democratic regimes, they largely will, at the late 1700s, early 1800s, throw out or get the voluntary freedom from their European overlords, largely Spain and Portugal. Okay. The Austrians are involved in this a little bit in Mexico, but don't worry too much about that. So that would be kind of the long and short of it. For what it's worth, most of the South American and Latin American, Central American regimes that do get independence, democracy, full democracy, doesn't last very long in most of these places. Bolivar himself goes pretty authoritarian near the end of his life. He talks a lot about democracy, and there's a lot of documents associated with him and how good democracy is and how many letters he writes. And somebody in class mentioned this Jamaica letter that Himmler's going on about. The truth of the matter is that he's actually a pretty nasty authoritarian at the end of his life. His decision is that, well, since democracy isn't getting done what I want to get done, I guess I'll just do it myself with the army. And that's kind of his end, sort of the way he goes out. So that would be the best I can do on that. I'm just going to keep on going until I get tired. Can we talk about the Jamaica letter? I just did talk about the Jamaica letter. Don't worry too much about it. I don't know why Himmler's going nuts about that. It's just a document. Okay, it's political and social changes that occurred as a result of the Industrial Revolution. Yeah, sure, of course. Okay, let's start with Europe and go from there. The most important piece of the Industrial Revolution is the movement of people from the country to the cities. This is different than the movement of rural farmers into medieval fairs and markets in towns. This is urbanization. There are cities now, and they are flooded with people who need jobs. They need jobs because at the time of the Industrial Revolution, say 1750 England, you do get also the start of these ideas of natural rights and property. And so things like, well, if I own my property and these are my lands, then they're my lands. I want to do things like build fences around them, so only I can farm my lands, only I can have my sheep graze my lands, and stuff like that. This ends up creating a lot of efficiencies in farming, actually, and that means more farm labor is unnecessary. So lots of farmers lose their jobs or are being offered wages so low that they're better off seeking a different line of work. Now, up to this point in history, there was no other line of work. As you know, the vast majority of human beings that have ever lived on this earth, their job was to farm and create food. They were peasants. The Industrial Revolution creates an alternative. That is, go to the city and labor in a factory. Whatever that factory looks like, a factory. Whether it's women in power loom mills working on cloth because they already had an expertise in cloth making from home. It was a female skill. Or it's men working in steel factories or whatever it might be. It could be anything. Sorry, I'm just getting some text here. I'm checking to see what's what on this. Okay, I'll read that out loud. All right, I have some weird friends. Okay, so that's sort of the start of it. Now, politically, Industrial Revolution creates a lot more actual democracy in countries. What it does is it breaks the notion that your name and your bloodline are critical. It now creates the notion of a middle class, a true middle class, which is somebody who can earn money and wealth becomes the marker of class. Remember the cult of domesticity, right? So Live, Laugh, Love, or Home Sweet Home, or tea time or the homemaker regions. You can use that thing as outside information on an AP exam if you make a statement that says the cult of domesticity was so profound that even in the New York State Regents exam system, as late as the 1950s, it was still there. I guarantee you'll get like 20 people to go Google it and see if they can find it on the internet at the AP read. All right, so stuff like that's on the table. But it also creates the ability for somebody to actually earn money, and with money, do things with it that could potentially earn more money. The one true about capitalism, without a doubt, is that you've heard this phrase: to make money, you got to spend money. It's kind of true. For example, if I want to earn a lot of money for my retirement, the way I do that is to not enjoy the money now, but to put that money into companies I think will grow in the future, and I can sell my interest in those companies in the future. And those companies have to invest in it. So, as an example, if I'm going to create a drug that's going to cure whatever, male pattern baldness, I guess, I'm going to fail for a long time. It's going to require investment. I'm unlikely to ever succeed. But if I do succeed, the riches will be profound. Thus, it may be worth it for me to try. Most people will fail. Some few will succeed, and the ones that succeed will become rich. That's what will happen. So that's capitalism. That's the notion of it. You own your resources, thus you can succeed or fail with them to the greatest extent of your own personal abilities, wherewithal, and so on. So that's a big part of industrialization. At the same time, though, you get a lot of course, real visible ways people can see work happening. So things like child labor comes into the forefront. Things like hours worked comes into the forefront. Now, I want to remind you, children worked on farms. One of the major reasons to have children for most of world history is that little sucker's free labor, right? We made him for free. He's free labor. Get his ass in the field. That was typical stuff. However, once you get to the part of history where children are now in cities, there's a lot more eyeballs on what happens to a person engaged in heavy, dangerous labor. Plenty of children throughout history got maimed, hurt, killed, damaged, whatever, on a farm. When an animal charged them, kicked them, they broke their foot on something. It's dangerous, heavy labor. The same things were happening in factories, but there was now a very visible public view on this because it was in a city. There's hundreds of workers there. When the kid loses his hand in the machine, hundreds of workers see spouting blood going everywhere and the kid screaming, as opposed to just some family who hears their kid screaming because he got gored by a bull on the farm. Like, all kinds of things would happen, but there's way more eyes on it now. So it became socially, over time, unacceptable to allow that kind of thing to happen. Frankly, the movement against child labor is what led to public schools. I'll tell you the truth, public schools were invented as a place to keep children so parents can keep working. It was an industrial era construct. The idea was, well, it makes sense financially for the state to create effectively a daycare for everybody, so that way the children can go to school while the parents go to work. And if you remember what a pain in the rear it was when COVID was going on, if you had, this was a while ago now, I don't know how old you were, but if you have younger siblings, you might remember your siblings having to do work on the computer from home all day long, and your parents might have been in a position where they had to go to work. It might have created real hassles for who's watching your kid at home. How is that working? And it became a societal problem again. It's one of the probably major reasons why things reopened, because at some point, society cannot have children at home unattended, but also needs people to work. So that was sort of the source of public schools, and industrialized labor really led to that, in kind of an unintentional way. When it comes to those are mostly social changes. When it comes to political changes, you do tend to see in states that industrialize a growing power of the business class. Now, it might not happen till after World War I that actual monarchies lose their powers and elite aristocratic politicians also come from elite aristocratic families. That's still true in a lot of places, but there was real significant societal power now in the business person who was wealthy, and their ability to hire people, and their ability to create capital, create resources that others could utilize, or that people could work and earn and keep their own labor. These were significant changes. Obviously, there's huge impacts The Industrial Revolution is one of the biggest impacts in world history, so it's hard to ever stop talking about it. There are massive implications for things like railroads and what that does to connectivity of human beings and the process of globalization, not to mention steamships, not to mention ammunition, not to mention upgraded machine guns, things like that, weapons of war, eventual tanks, mass-produced steel. There's more than I could possibly cover. The Industrial Revolution can and could be its own course by itself. Its impact on human history was extraordinary and profound. History of France. Well, I covered a lot of it, actually, that you need to know. Don't get too deep in the weeds on any single European country. Remember, this is not a European course. I'd say that you remember your course technically starts in 1200. 1200 France is France in the Middle Ages. Don't pay too much attention to it. I'd say the first time you start thinking about France in a significant and meaningful way is probably the French Revolution. I think that's the first part of history you really need to worry about with France that might even come up. I can't imagine anything before then coming up. Again, stuff like Charlemagne is all before the official start of the course, so I wouldn't worry too much about France, if I'm being honest. All right, let's see. Leah, can we go over the different trade routes? Yes, of course we can. First off, almost all trade routes except for extremely modern. I'm talking 1975 onwards modern. All trade is about luxury goods in any other era. Nobody's shipping rice and flour and basic by flour I mean like wheat flour and basic things. Nobody is. It's not worth it. It's not profitable. There's no need. Even in the Columbian Exchange era, things like the potato wasn't shipped in large amounts. Things like it just wasn't. It was shipped and then it was kept and it was grown. It doesn't make up trade. Trade is a luxury good thing. That's why you get things like the Silk Road. If you actually look, in fact, I can do this for you. Trade goods on trade routes. I'm sure there's some. Yeah, this is, what's his face? This is Freemanpedia. This is actually pretty good. This is not a bad graphic. You can find it yourself. So you have the Indian Ocean Trade Network in blue. I don't know why he used this gigantic bluish color for the Mongol territories. That's almost the same color as the water. I hope that doesn't confuse anybody. But that red is the Silk Road. You've got the Trans-Saharan and African trade routes over here in gold. There is the Hanseatic League in Northern Europe. I don't think it'll show up on the test, like I said. He's got a lot of garbage, kind of slapped into this, and it's kind of not particularly well organized. But in terms of trade goods, so what do you've got? You've got a few things. Number one, you've got obviously silk on the Silk Road, but actually remember, if you want to get really impressive with your graders, silk was not traded on the Silk Road so much as it was the currency used on the Silk Road. Remember, pirates wore silk sashes because that was their money. You cut off a little piece, you hand it off. Silk was valuable to everybody. It was like basically currency. You have porcelains, obviously. You have glass. I can definitely find a better map than this. I'm sorry. Because rather than me kind of sit here and think about it, there are maps that have... Yeah, there's the one. That's the one I was thinking of. Yep. This is basically true. Now, I don't know exactly the year on this thing. It says Roman trade in 180 AD. And that might be true. You get stuff like glass coming out of the European sphere going east. You get horses going east. You get some gemstones and things like that. Spices obviously come out of Southeast Asia, travel up the Indian Ocean Trade Network into India, where everybody buys them from India. India is the central hub of the Indian Ocean Trade Network, and we could probably say that something like Samarkand, which would be, if I go back to this map, Samarkand right over here would be the sort of central hub of the Silk Road trade. Silk Road goes from Chang'an, China, which is over here, to, God, this is a terrible map, dude. Chang'an, China to, well, not Byzantium, but Constantinople. And then you have the internal European trade routes. You had the Venetians controlling Mediterranean trade, along with the Genoese Italians for a long time. If we back it up into the, say, 1450s maritime trade. Okay. Yep. Nope. Yeah, nope. Yes, good. If we go to the 1450s maritime trade here, what you've got here is you can see the trade flows of silver. Don't forget how important silver was from the era of, say, 1550 onwards. Okay, you got to give some time. Columbus gets to the New World in 1492. If my math is remembering right, I believe Cortez takes over the Aztecs in 1518, 1520, something like that. And you got to give time for them to conquer everybody, move on to Peru, conquer Peru, and then get the silver and the gold and all that, figure out the silver mine of Potosi, and then go from there. So you've got a couple hundred years of intense silver trade coming out of the New World, okay? So that's a big part of the trade that happens on these trade routes, the Silk Road, no doubt about it, the silver trade, no doubt about it. What else could we talk about? Trade network-wise. Oh, duh, African slavery. Obviously, sorry, that's a biggie. So let's go pull that sucker up. So you have the triangular trade, or let's call it the Atlantic slave trade, or actually, how about this? Let's do it this way. This is the actual thing we tend to call it, the Atlantic system. The Atlantic system is really the correct, that works. The Atlantic system is really the correct phrase in AP history. We don't really call it the triangular trade. It's called the Atlantic system. So, the Atlantic system, right? So what do we have here? We've got European shipping finished goods down to Africa, particularly to West African kingdoms. West African kingdoms are using these finished goods, guns in particular, to wage successful warfare on Central African kingdoms. Central African kingdoms are therefore losing, and their people are being captured. Those prisoners of war are being sold by Africans to Europeans as slaves. I want to remind you the kind of image of the European leaping off the boat and just grabbing like whatever black people they can get was not really the case often. Did happen, and it happened more later in the slave trade, actually, when most of the slaves in these western territories are depleted, and now Europeans are kind of in the position of having to actually go sort of capture slaves as opposed to trade for slaves. This leads to the Middle Passage, which you obviously recall is the famous slave passage. If you want, and it could be a helpful reference point, Slate magazine did a slave trade thing. I forget what the heck it is, this thing. So if you play this, and I'll just let it play here as I talk, you could see the animated version of this, which shows the history of the slave trade. You might remember we looked at this in class. And what you've got, I'll zoom in a little bit for you. What you've got is all these dots are going to start flying across the screen. They'll become much more obvious in a second. And that is the volume. Each one's its own independent slave ship. So if I were to stop it, stop it. There. This is a ship, the NS de Regla, which is a Spanish vessel, I think. I don't know who ran this ship. It's right here. See, slave voyages. This stuff is all... yeah, it's a Brazilian ship, so there you go. This stuff is all tracked, and so all these ships are in. Each one's a slave ship carrying slaves, and you can see, and the most important element here is where most of them are going. Most of them are going to the Caribbean, where they're sold in slave markets all around the New World. Remember, there were two models of slavery in Central, South America, and the Caribbean. In general, slaves were not allowed to have families. Rather, slaves were worked mostly till death and then replaced because it was simply cheap to do so. In the United States, particularly after 1787, one of the compromises of the Constitution was that slavery would continue, but new slaves could not be imported. So relatively few slaves were sold into the United States. After that period, none were, and at least not legally. And even then, it was, as you can see here, mainland North America represents a sort of a sliver of slaves. The vast majority go to Brazil and the Caribbean, and that's where they ended up. So this, of course, leads to a few changes. Like, for example, African culture gets mixed with South American, Central American culture, and you get byproducts of that. You get South American and Latin American foods and Caribbean foods that are heavily influenced by some of the flavor profiles of Africa. Things like jerk cuisine, or the heavy use of yams, or the sorry, my brain's going a little bit. Or reggae music or stuff like that. These things all come from a mixture. Santeria as a religion is sort of Christianity, local Latin American stuff, and shamanism from Africa kind of bundled together. So you get a number of sort of effects from that. Obviously, the effects on the New World, you should know, right? Why did this start? It started because disease had wiped out those local Amerindians. Get used to seeing that word, Amerindians. These are American Indians. You whack the word together. You'll sometimes see that in the AP exam. And of course, when you move this many people, the vast majority of these people being, of course, males, out of Africa, this has an incredibly terrible disruptive effect on African culture generally, right? I mean, you're just depleting the male population in a terrifying way, and there's no way something like this doesn't have long-term implications. And it's not a surprise that Africa, especially when it's going to be colonized by 1885 by most of these nations, you see it starting to slow down now, the slave trade here. But remember, it's going to be fully colonized by Europeans by 1900. So it's got 50 years of peace before the slavery becomes, we're just going to colonize you. So the idea is that this obviously has a massive impact on why Africa is effectively the world's poorest, most undeveloped part of the world today, despite the fact that it's absolutely loaded up with natural resources. Let's see. Safavids. Okay, so gunpowder empires. Cool. Here's a map. There's better maps. That's a better map. Do it that way. Okay, gunpowder empires. So the Ottomans are in salmon. The Safavids are in purple. The Mughals are in orange. Okay. Safavids are the only one of the three that is Shia Muslim. I'll remind you what Shia Muslim is, or Shiaism is. Shia, unlike Sunni, believe that there is only one true bloodline that can run Islam. That is the bloodline of Muhammad through his daughter Fatima. If you want to sort of really impress, if there's an opportunity to talk Islamic stuff on the essays, don't forget to talk about things like matrilineal property rights among Arab people. That was a huge reason why these guys believe Ali deserves to rule. In Arab culture, pre-Islamic, property passed through the women because the men would often die in combat. So men would have to marry their relatives' women, whether their relatives' wives. So I might have to marry my brother's wife because my brother got killed in battle. I might have to marry my cousin's wife and bring her into my house, and suddenly I've got 5 wives. I got 7 wives because I'm taking care of it's effectively like a life insurance policy. Like, I'll take care of the women and children of your family, because if I were to die in battle, you would do it for me. But that means then that it creates all kinds of inheritance problems. Do I inherit the property of all these various families? What happens if I don't like this woman, or I don't like her children? How do they get taken care of? This is supposed to be a safety net system. So the way to maintain that was, although the men had patriarchal political power, the women actually were the ones who kept the property. So technically, Muhammad had no sons. So since Fatima, his eldest daughter, married this guy Ali, was the title of Caliph, the powers to run Islam, the right to do so, the divine spark that God had placed upon Muhammad in a very special way to Muslims, did that pass as property through Fatima into Ali? And the answer for Shia is absolutely yes. And so ever since, the Sunnis, who believe that no, any educated, virtuous man of Islam could be considered the Caliph if the Islamic community more or less agrees. The Sunni tradition wins out. It is the majority tradition. The Shia tradition is the minority tradition. But the Safavids are one of the few truly Shia states. Sparing you a lot of details, they're a Persian society. They are Persian by blood, though they're Muslims, they're Persian. They create a powerful state in the Shia tradition that is defeated in battle by the Ottomans, and eventually sort of crushed between both the Ottoman and the Mughal sides, where there's conflict on both ends, and eventually disintegrate into more or less what becomes fully Ottoman territory over time, and they kind of dwindle into a small state. I make it sound simple, but that's more or less the truth, okay? In terms of what you need to know about the Safavids. Can we go over any skills like sourcing for the DBQ? We can. What I'll do is I'd like to go through more of the content stuff if I can, And then my plan would be maybe to do like a last 15, 20 minutes on skills. If you want to pop out, pop in, like I understand. Don't feel like you're offending me, or if you gotta like go away, take a break, go take a bathroom break, whatever it is. I might take one in 5 minutes myself anyway. My tea's getting low. I might need something stronger. Okay. But we will come back to the DBQ. Yes, I promise. But if I start that now, I'll have nothing left in the tank to do anything else later. Can we do Latin American independence movements? Well, I did the best I could with that before, Katie. For now, anyway. Basically, Bolivar, and someone mentioned the Jamaica letter. This is all related. Bolivar is the chief figure who is behind these Latin American independence movements. But basically, I would say, if you're going to sort of summarize them, one, they're the first place in the world to decolonize. One. They were also the first place in the world colonized, so there's something to that. But they were the first to decolonize, number one. Number two, they had entrenched populations of white people that had been living there for quite a while, for generations now. Although they didn't start out as settler colonies, because they had been under the control of Europeans for so long, a whole other racial class system develops there, the Costa system. And as I mentioned, the Creole element, this white person with education who has no political power, or at least less political power than the other white people, leads to a lot of resentment that eventually leads to wise revolutions. That's a simplistic view, but to be blunt with you, it's basically the idea. Jamaica letter. It's just a letter from Bolivar declaring how cool democracy is before he decides to ignore it. So, I mean, I don't know. I don't know why. I've heard Himmler made this big deal about the Jamaica letter. Okay, congratulations, my friend. Okay, good question. What's the difference between encomienda and hacienda? All right, encomienda was the original system in the New World of Spain, where conquistadors became medieval landlords that controlled the system. Hacienda is what replaces it once the Spanish government fully takes over operations, okay? Hacienda is more like plantation landlords, and encomienda is more like medieval baron. So in the encomienda, I can work my people to death. F them. They're mine, all right? I can do what I want with them. They're basically my serfs. That's not what hacienda is. Hacienda is much more like you're a tenant farmer. You pay me rent as I make you, or you're effectively required to farm or mine my lands. And the hacienda would be run by a what the hell is the guy called? The Spanish name for it. Caballero. The caballero would be it's like means cowboy basically. The caballero would be the guy who runs the hacienda. It's like a landlord, a plantation landlord. Whereas an encomendero was much more like a medieval lord who treated his lands like, these are my serfs, I am the law, there is one system and it's mine. That's the difference, okay? It's basically encomienda first, replaced by hacienda second. Safavids and how they came to be and how they fought the Ottomans and stuff. I did what I could, I think, there. I would just say, if I can sort of remember, I don't know if I mentioned, I'll mention it again. These are the gunpowder empires. These are empires that utilize arms that are firearms in battle, not for the first time ever, but for the first time in large-scale deployment. Remember, they're utilizing these gigantic cannons, right? These bombasts, they were called, and they bombarded their enemies. Remember, the Ottomans used this technology to defeat the city of Constantinople finally by blowing up its 8 walls. Nobody had ever been able to do that, right? Remember that they had musket regiments and things like that. I mean, early days on these things, but they existed. So these gunpowder empires were able to solidify their power through gunfire. And the Safavids were kind of an eventual loser in the conflict. I mean, that's kind of the sort of short and sweet of it. I would focus a lot more on the Ottomans, guys, than I would the Safavids. Particularly the Ottomans, because they lived so long, right? They're there to defeat the Byzantines and finally end them in 1453, but they're still around in 1914 to fight World War One. So take some time to understand what the hell the Ottomans are doing. Like from 1450 to 1750, what's the Ottomans doing? From 1750 to 1900, what's the Ottomans doing? From 1910 onwards, the Ottomans are falling apart. Like, I would kind of make sure you know them along those 3 lines. They're one of the longer lived societies. Don't ignore them. They're a very important Muslim society. Remember, your course starts in 1200. Most of the course is Muslims or Ottomans, okay? So try to keep that in mind. Okay. Anna, you asked, I answered. Okay. For France, also Napoleon, the French Revolution. All right. What about Napoleon? I wouldn't worry much about Napoleon. I would be stunned if his name even appears on the test. It's a situation where the AP Euro people kind of claim Napoleon as theirs. Okay, they you can make a very strong argument Napoleon is not particularly much of a global figure. However, I don't want to deny you the opportunity to say something about the man if you think it might help you. If you're going to say anything about Napoleon, he's a brilliant military general who, whether he does it inadvertently or because it's simply expedient, spreads the message of the Enlightenment and the French Revolution and the ideals of brotherhood, liberty, fraternity, democracy throughout Europe by effectively putting real threats, in some cases, actual dismantlings of existing kingdoms. I'll tell you, here's an effect for Napoleon. Napoleon defeated the Holy Roman Empire and then destroyed it. He ended it. And he recalled it the Confederation of the Rhine River. The Confederation of the Rhine was just a bunch of independent German states. That's all it was. So he polishes off the Holy Roman Empire for good. And then after that, when he's gone, within about 50 years, there is a strong movement of German unification under the state of Prussia, Prussia, not Russia, two different places. And that is the same Germany that ends up becoming the German Empire of World War One. All right, so you can kind of put that on him. I'd say the spreading of the Enlightenment ideals, the spreading of nationalism. Sorry, that's a big one. You can kind of lay that at his feet. The idea that your nation is your team, not your medieval lord, not your king. Your nation is that you have a flag, and that flag matters. In this case, my flag is, the money equals smiles flag. Like, that's your flag, that's your team, right? Okay. Well, that was sort of a notion he began, and the revolution and his conquering spread that message to people all throughout Europe. It leads to a lot of revolutions after he's defeated, actually. Can we talk about early China? We can. I don't know how early you want to go. Again, the course starts in 1200. So what I'd say is, what is China in 1200? China in 1200 is the Song Dynasty. Remember this, I'd say. China is the home of Confucianism. Confucianism is the foundational thought pattern of China. There is a competitive thought pattern in Buddhism, which arrives in China with the fall of the Han Dynasty. So roughly speaking, Confucius gets his stuff going in the late Zhou. The Qin implement it as legalism, right? The strict form of Confucianism, we call legalism. And then it is reimagined by the Han as Confucianism as we know it today. And then it is used as the basis for civil service exams. The idea of this educated man would know Confucian theory. Started by the Han. There's a period of disunity between the Han and the Sui, probably about 300 years or so. During that period, Buddhism enters China from India. Remember, Buddhism was kind of useless in India. They didn't need it. And it competes heavily with Confucianism. Because remember, Buddhism is a personal religion. You can do Buddhism on your own. Confucianism has no solution to stopping chaos. It's good to keep things together. It's a nice glue once you've assembled all the pieces, but it doesn't actually force anybody to do anything, right? You can't say, well, we have 5 relationships. You have to listen. No, I don't. Here's a sword. It's in your stomach. Sorry. Like, until there's peace, Confucianism doesn't do anything. Now, the Sui and Tang reestablish, eventually, Confucian exam systems. They rebuild China tremendously, actually. They reestablish the Silk Road connections. They start the tribute system properly. You get the Grand Canal out of these guys. It's a big deal. They expand China's borders further than they've ever been at the time. And after the Tang, you get the Song Dynasty, which is much more commercial oriented and internally oriented and Confucian oriented, especially the exam system stuff, and not very militarily oriented, which leaves them vulnerable to attack from northern nomads in the form of the Jurchen, who attack from basically Manchuria, over here for you, down that way, and take over northern China, and then the Mongols take over the Manchurian northern Chinese, the Jurchen northern Chinese, same people actually, then down south take over all of China. And that brings us to the Ming, which we discussed earlier. I would say focus on China as a culture generator in East Asia. that they are the center of culture and it radiates outwards from them. I'd say that's a thing. Yeah, that's what I would do. What was the Mexican Revolution? Everybody's super worried about the Mexican Revolution. All right, since I have no more questions, I'll give everybody, what I'll do is I'll answer this question, and then I'll take a 5 break and get myself some more tea or coffee or something. Then I'll come back and talk about essays, and then if there's nothing else sitting in chat for me to talk about, we'll probably call it there. I'm still good to go, but you never know. I could just drop on camera. Who knows? I've done it before. So, okay. Everyone's freaked out about the Mexican Revolution because there was a DBQ on the Mexican Revolution. The Mexican Revolution DBQ caught everybody off guard. It is very rare that a DBQ is about one specific place, particularly a piece of history with a lot of U.S. connections. I don't want you to freak out about the Mexican Revolution. I do not think they're going to do that again. But I know it's not going to make anybody too calm until I describe some stuff. So, the Mexican Revolution was in effect. Here, let's go back to the whole... Oh, as you can see, no one tells you this. There was a bunch of Mexican revolutions, but they mean this one. Okay. Here's one thing I learned about the Mexican history, the history of Mexico. I took a course in Mexico in college. It was called Mexico Through Food. We ate tamales and talked about Mexican history. No, I'm not lying. That's what we did. And what I learned, if you ask me, what was the thing Malvagno took away about Mexican history? Mexico's got a lot of civil wars, man. Like a lot of civil wars. Just for like 100 years or so there, from right around, I'd say, 1800 to 1910, 20. It's just civil war after civil war after civil war, revolution, this, that. It's constant. So, that is one thing. So, let's see. Which bit of this should I really go into? Okay, Porfirio Diaz. Well, look at this handsome fella here, okay? Porfirio Diaz. Porfirio Diaz was a authoritarian ruler who ran Mexico. If you're like, he don't look particularly Mexican to me, well, I mean, I'm not going to get too deep in the weeds on this today because, again, I really don't think it's going to come up. But there was Austrians who ran Mexico. It was a very, very, very weird thing for a while there, okay? But remember, this was Spanish Habsburg territory. The Habsburgs also ran the Holy Roman Empire. There's a lot of things happening at the same time. But basically, there are a number of agitators. In fact, I wonder if they have that listed here. Sometimes they do. Yeah, belligerents. Here you go. There's a number of different groups that all want to have a little piece of the pie, that are engaging in battles for one reason or another. They have them listed as pro-government, anti-government, and that's effectively kind of true. There were pro-government forces that wanted to hold up the Mexican government, which was largely a militaristic government formed around what they called the military junta being a military-style government, kind of like Japan during World War II, where the military class really runs the show. This was fairly common in South America, Latin America. If you know the story of Evita, what's his face down there? Perón in Argentina was the same thing. He ran a military junta. He was a militaristic leader. Anytime you start seeing leaders here, where's another guy? Victoriano Huerta. This guy was another piece of work. What was the other guy I'm thinking of? Not him. I just saw his name. Not Pancho Villa. I don't know. I forget. Anyhow, but when you go back to our boy over here, Diaz, anytime you start seeing leaders dressed in military garb, assume that there's a reason they're doing so. That means that the government is championing the notion of the virtues of militarism. And that's kind of what you have here, okay? Like I said, I don't want to go too deep in the weeds on this. This picture, I'd say, summarizes a lot of it. You have military versus anti-military. These are guys with, like, three-piece suits firing rifles and cannons. These are anti-government forces. This is the peasant poor class led by like Emiliano Zapata. Then you have Pancho Villa, who's probably the most famous name to come out of this thing, who actually was an aristocratic sort of pro-government Mexican who got a lot of fame attacking and raiding he basically would flee the Mexican government by going into U.S. territory to avoid getting captured. And he was sort of border crossing, and it led to some stuff with the United States. Like I said, I don't know. I'll put it this way: be happy it wasn't your DBQ because it was a weird one and no one really understood what the hell it was doing there. But I would not spend too much time worrying about Mexico. In fact, I would spend no more time worrying about Mexico. I would be stunned if it comes up, modern Mexico comes up in any significant way. I would be stunned. It might be there because the AP does have a history of sort of testing certain things in order to force people to teach it. It does do that. But it's largely a pro-government, anti-government thing is basically what it is. It's that's the Mexican Revolution, and it has a lot of different moving parts. A lot of these people are not people; they're groups. The Maderistas, the Zapatistas, the Villaistas. These are all different groups. These are the Federales. These are all different groups. This is the Reyistas are the people who support monarchy. They want to see a monarch put back in the government. It's super complex, man. I would not lose any sleep over this at all. If I'm going to be totally honest with you, I wouldn't worry about it. All right, I don't know. I know it was there. I know it's a DBQ, but remember, DBQs are built to be obscure. They don't expect you to know everything. The skill they're testing is actually your ability to analyze the documents. So although you may not have known anything about the Mexican Revolution, aside from the evidence beyond the document point, everything else is in the essay, really. Everything else is in the documents. Everything else is you reading and interpreting. So to a certain degree, they can get away with that. All right, I am going to take a 5-minute break. If you want, when we come back in 5 minutes, we will knock out German and Italian unification, and we'll talk about the Mesoamerican civilizations. And then once that's done, I'll do some essay skill stuff, okay? My goal would be to wrap by, let's say, 9:45, 10 o'clock. Okay, that's when I probably would sign off here. Plus, I think at some point, you need to stop spinning the wheels and go to bed. I don't think it's worth it in the end to keep on pushing this from when you're not going to get any further on it, all right? So I'm going to go ahead and take a little break. Like I said, just 5 minutes. I might make a cup of coffee and then come back, and we'll go from there, okay? So I'll be back. What's up? I'm back. I got fresh tea. I'm ready to go. Okay. I said 5 minutes. How long ago was that? I don't even remember. I'll give people around 2 more minutes. Yes, that makes perfect sense, Alexandra. No problem. We can go over that. I understand that's a problem for everybody. Okay. No issues. No problem. All right. I want to turn my fan on. I'm afraid it's going to make some wind noise in the mic. We'll go for the open window instead. All right, who's left? 14 brave souls. Everybody else is giving the hell up. I understand. I'm on the verge myself. Okay. German and Italian unification. That one's actually fairly straightforward, actually. So... I mean, I'm not expecting there to be a joint article on this on Wikipedia, but what the hell. Yeah, they're right back to back. So we'll do one of these, and we'll do one of these, and here we go. These were contemporaneous events. They happened at the same time, okay? So the dates are kind of important. So you've got the process of unification, which goes beyond... It's complete by 1871, for lack of a better term. And then for Italian unification, again, 1871. Now, this is, again, I want to avoid the details that would become part of AP Euro. These events will not be tested on the AP exam. I will tell you that now. This is strictly AP Euro content. However, let's push the Italian one aside for now. Suffice to say about Italy, it was in the control of many different foreign powers. This chunk was owned by the Austrians. This chunk was owned by the French. This chunk was owned by the Pope, and so on. Armies from this place, the island of Sardinia, actually attack north, claim territory over here in what was called Piedmont, and then eventually move their way south. Rebellions in the south move their way north. They join forces. They will agree to name a king. The king of Sardinia is the king of Italy. Bob's your uncle. That's it. It will not be tested. I promise you. Let's talk about the German one a little bit. The German one won't be tested either. But this Germany here is the German Reich. Now, most people think of Reich and they think Hitler's Germany. The Reich just means the Kingdom of Germany or the Empire of Germany. So it's more typically called the German Empire. It was Prussia, which is... oh my God, these are in German. No. We're not doing that. Yeah, cool, man. There it is. Okay. Remember I told you Napoleon left this whole place in basically a bunch of little states? That's it. That kaleidoscopic puke on the screen there is the German states, okay? Every one of those tiny little color blobs is its own independent, unique German state where everybody thinks they're a magical, special German fancy prince, okay? This was the reason why, go back to the first question, this is the reason why Martin Luther got away with doing what he did. If he tried that crap in Italy, they would have rounded him up and hung him, all right? Here, all these guys wanted to be independent. All these little princes and dukes and archdukes and whatever the hell they called themselves wanted to be independent. So it made sense. Now, I take you over to the far right here to the Kingdom of Prussia. The Kingdom of Prussia, eventually Prussia-Brandenburg, ends up actually becoming a powerful state that survives the Napoleonic Wars. And they have a Kaiser. The Kaiser is the German word for Caesar. You can see the Roman influence here, just like Tsar is the German word for Caesar, a Russian word for Caesar. Anywho, the Prussian state is led by a politician named Otto von Bismarck. He's very famous, and he's like the prime minister. And in service to the monarch of Prussia, the Kaiser, he lays plans in place to create a unified Germany. And he's a pretty significant political master at doing this. And sparing the details, because the details will matter for AP Euro, but not for us, the German Empire that enters World War I was the German Empire as largely forged by Otto von Bismarck on behalf of his Kaiser, his ruler. Famously, at the end of his career, the Kaiser fires Bismarck because he falls out of favor with the government. And Bismarck warns that, what's going to happen, guys, is there's going to be a problem in the Balkans that will set Europe ablaze, that will start a major catastrophe. And he predicted exactly that there would be a problem in the Balkan states. Remember where the Balkans were? The Balkans are. I'll take you to the Balkans. Here we go. Balkans map. The Balkans are basically everything. These are the Balkans here. Here. No, not good map. Not a great map. Better. These are the Balkans, folks. Everything here are the Balkans. Greece, Macedonia, Albania, Romania, all these places. Basically east of Italy, north of Greece, west of the Black Sea. These are the Balkans. What was for a long time the Byzantine Empire is called the Balkans. This is where Archduke Franz Ferdinand gets shot, and this is where the issues of Serbian nationalism versus Austrian power lead to World War One. Okay, so I only bring up German unification because it is the state that is forged that is part of World War One. Okay. Okay. Next, before I get into Amerindian, Mesoamerican cultures. Okay, there are only 3 that you need to know. Mesoamerican states. You got 3. Okay. What is this? I have no idea. Yeah, no. Yes. All right, the 3 you need to know. That's not helpful at all. The 3 you need to know are the Maya, the Aztec, and potentially the Toltec. You could also include the Inca in that. In fact, the Inca will be more important than the Toltec. Let me go in order. The Toltec were the most ancient of them. We don't know much. We have stone records and archaeological monuments, and that's about it. They look to have been a progenitor culture upon which the Maya and the Aztec took a lot of culture cues, kind of like the way the Etruscans gave a lot of culture cues to the Romans, something like that. The Maya and the Aztec we know a bit more about. The Maya occupy this area over here. This is the Yucatan Peninsula. I have no idea what any of this says. I don't speak Spanish, and I certainly don't read Spanish, and I certainly cheated on my Spanish regions, so don't ask me for help there. I'm mostly looking for a map. That's much better. Cool. Okay. The Yucatan Peninsula is over here. Oh, God. Oh, boy. Okay, that's got a 7-second delay, and that's taking me 20 seconds to open, so, okay, great. This map is the map of Central America, okay? This peninsula over here, I'm circling with my mouse, is the Yucatan. This is where the Maya civilization is. There are Mayas at the same time as there are Aztecs. In fact, the earliest contacts Europeans had with this region were actually with the Maya. Then this red territory was, as far as we can tell, the extent of the Aztec power. Now, the Aztec, remember, were a militaristic society that conquered their neighbors, subjected them to labor service and human sacrifice and a few other things, all in an attempt to stave off their belief that if the gods were not fed blood and violence and souls and whatever, there would be a doomsday apocalypse that would kill everybody, okay? That's them. What the course is usually most concerned about is that you don't have the opinion that these are simplified peoples living in savage states. The course is very concerned that you understand that, in fact, though they're technologically far superior to Europeans, they are, in fact, still possessing of the characteristics of complex societies. Record keeping, writing, caste systems, hierarchies, public works, all of that. These are not the savages. These are not the simple peoples of the New World. These were complex societies that had a massive technological deficit. You could kind of equate it to what if aliens showed up to fight us? We'd probably be doomed for a similar reason, okay? Remember, of course, that it wasn't really even then, though, so much that the Spanish brought so many men and so much technology that they were able to overwhelm these people. Remember that, in fact, the conquest of the Aztec was much more about the neighboring peoples who hated the freaking Aztec. So the Aztec were right here in the middle. I'm sure I can zoom in considering how much Oh, we're going deeper. Okay. All right. Okay. That's too much now. Where am I? Oh, okay. I meant to find that lake. I ended up in the Pacific Ocean. This is um, this is the lake around which the empire was built. Tenochtitlan, the capital here, plus several of these other Aztec cities, and then these sort of distant settlements were mostly their kind of military outposts and things like that, from which they subjugated local peoples. A lot of these local peoples hated the Aztecs' goddamn guts and were happy to help a foreign group of Spaniards riding strange creatures and armed in steel weapons and steel armor and guns help destroy their ancient enemies. They didn't quite recognize at the time that what they were really looking at was eventually a full-scale takeover of the entire continent, but that was the deal. Then the Peruvian Inca kind of fell in a similar pattern to the Spaniards. The Spaniards' technologies plus their willingness to engage with local people created a model of conquest. Remember, of course, that Peru was the source of the Potosi silver mine. I don't know why my camera just got a little dark there. Hold on, let me see if I do this. That helps. Not really. Who cares? The Peruvian Inca was also the source of the silver mine that would eventually, Potosi, that would feed the world a worldwide silver economy until it ran out. And it causes global inflation before it runs out, so it's pretty significant. What else? Thanks. Thank you. Can we go over examples of grouping? Can we do free markets? Let's do free markets, then we'll do essays. Okay. In the modern world, free market economics versus command economics, okay? All right. Most societies, America included, do not have free market or command. We have a thing called mixed markets. Now, think of it this way. A fully communist society that had complete government controls over all means of production would be way over here. And a fully free, totally independent, government makes no decisions and controls no resources, free market would be over here. Neither of these two things exist. Instead, everyone is on a shifting scale where some percentage of your economy is free market and some percentage of your economy is command. Command would mean the government runs it. So let me give you an example. In your world, in your life, your school is a piece of the command economy. It is the command of government that you will pay taxes to fund the school. That's a command economy. You don't get to choose whether or not you fund the school. You don't get to decide we're not going to pay for the school. Even if every resident in the district votes down the budget will simply be at a lower number and you will still be taxed. So this is a command system. Whether you are happy with education at Shoreham, unhappy with education at Shoreham, wish it was better, wish it was different, want to be taught baking, I don't know, doesn't matter. The government commands it. Contrast that to 4-year non-public universities. If you want to go to Harvard, if you want to go, they're not the best example, but we'll go with it. If you want to go to private schools of some kind, I don't know, St. Joe's or something, you pay what you are willing to pay. If the tuition's X dollars and you're willing to pay it, pay it. If you want to study X instead of Y, do so. If the school you have doesn't offer a program you want, go to a school that does. That's free markets. Also, free markets are things like what we're doing right now. Not a single one of you needs to pay me for this. I am doing this free. The school does not require it of me. This is the free market transaction we're engaging in. Is I am charging you nothing. Okay? I could have said, hey, you know what? It's a paid link. You have to pay me $5 on, I don't know, Subscribestar or Patreon or something, and then I'll give you the link and you can get in here. I could have done that. And that would be free market. I would have evaluated that my skills, talents, and time are worth X dollars, and you could have made a decision about whether or not you felt it was worth the price. If I had said $5, most of you probably would have paid it. It would have been unethical for me to do so because I'm your teacher, so I didn't do that. But suppose I wasn't. Suppose my name was Himmler, and I decided I was going to make money on you. Okay, I could say my time is worth $5. If you think it's worth $5, pay it. If you think it's not worth $5, don't pay it. That's free markets. Most transactions in your lives are free markets. Most transactions in America are free markets. Nobody tells you what a pair of Nike should cost. Nobody tells you what a pair of, I don't know what else you wear. No one else tells you what good music is or bad music is. You all listen to bad music. No one makes those decisions. If you want to buy Kanye's Christmas album, go buy Kanye's Christmas album. It's up to you. It's your decision. That's free markets. Now, policy-wise, governments that support businesses to act in this independent way, that's a free market policy. Often free market policies are actually the absence of policies. It's often we're not going to regulate an industry. We're not going to put rules on the production and sale of milk. We're not going to tell you what you need to charge if you want to clean somebody's house. Those are free market policies, or often not to have policies, or to enshrine in law. Another way you can do it, you can enshrine in law the idea that the person who owns their resources is themselves. In other words, you own your talents, you own your time, and you decide what they're worth. Command systems don't do that. The more command you get, the more the government makes those decisions for you. So if you go to a place like the Soviet Union, if the Soviet Union tells you you're going to farm this farm using this technique and working with these people, and you will get paid what we say you get paid, that's command system. They could do that for any profession. You're a doctor. You will be a doctor. You'll be a doctor of this type. Hey, you know what? You don't even want to be a doctor. You're a talented scientist and you have good scores in medical field testing. However, you want to be a ballerina. Tough goddamn luck. We, the society, say to you, you will be a doctor. Go be a doctor. We'll pay you what we think you deserve. That's command. Okay? In today's world, the free markets have largely won. But again, most societies are a mix. So if you're asking me to put numbers on it, America is probably something like 65% free market, 35% command. Government controls a significant sum of our money and spends a significant sum of our money. In China, you could probably flip that. It's probably more like 65% command, maybe 70%, 30 to 35% free market. And depending on what you're talking about in China, some markets are completely government controlled. You go to a place like, what's less regulated? There are a lot of European states are like 50-50, like it's a lot of government involvement, but plenty of free markets. It's I don't want to oversimplify it, but that's basically the idea, okay? So the policy is often to have an absence of policy or to adopt what you call laissez-faire. The government has laissez-faire, no touching, hands off of the economy. But that's very, 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 very rare in the modern world, okay? All right, groupings and DBQ skills in general. All right then, folks. All right, how do you group DBQs? Okay, if I'm going to be honest with you, this is probably the hardest part of the DBQ. You're going to get your DBQ. All right. Let's look one up. Well, look up the Mexican Revolution one. Freak everybody out. Oh, this isn't the one. This is the one we already did in class together. That's fine. Let's do this one. Okay. There's your prompt. Evaluate the extent to which European imperialism affected economies in Africa or Asia in the 19th and early 20th century. Let's start by saving you some time. All right. Scrolling up. What is this page? This is the page. That's the first page of this section. What is it? It's to be ignored. Okay? Don't read a word on it. Don't spend a minute reading it. Now, your test proctor might have to read it to you, and you might be told, do not turn the page until we tell you. I have actually no idea. All right, I'm not allowed in the room. I don't know. But if they say, okay, begin, and you're staring at this page, I am telling you to turn the goddamn page. All you're looking at is basically the rubric I've shown you 100 times, explained in a worse way. Do not spend time on this page. You have 1 hour and 40 minutes. To be clear with you, that's 100 minutes, right? 60 minutes plus 40 minutes. In that time, you must get the DBQ and the LEQ done. And you will. The DBQ is worth 25% of the test. Any 1 point earned on DBQ is more important than any 1 point earned anywhere else. Yes, the multiple choice is more by percentage of the whole section, but there's 55 questions there. Every DBQ point matters a lot. So, our goal is a minimum 3. 4 would be nice. 5 is amazing on the DBQ. You know how I feel about the DBQ. Do not attempt to be fancy. Do not try to do the sourcing. Save your breath and save your time. Focus on what can be done realistically. We are working on strategy to score points because this test is worth money and it's helping your college admissions, okay? So we're not going to get deep in the weeds on what is good writing or not. The hell with that. What is going to get you a good grade? We'll worry about the good writing another day. So, no conclusions. Don't write them. They're not worth any points. Get rid of them. Now, what do? The first thing you do, remember, is you get the whole section here. So you get the hour and 40 minutes. The DBQ is here. Every part of this booklet is the DBQ with the exception of the final page. The final page will contain the LEQs. Remember, there are 3 LEQs. Remember that you are to select which one you're doing, and at the top of the essay booklet, there'll be bubbles. Question 1, 2, or 3. You circle or bubble, I think it's circle, which one it is you picked. Do not circle essay 2 if you mean to be doing essay 3. You'll get a 0, okay? Do not do this, please. Very important. Okay, what else can I say? You're going to spend 15 minutes to 20 minutes on nothing but reading the documents and creating the groups. Okay? I know it's a very scary thought to take 20 minutes and have a blank page sitting in front of you that you have not yet put any answers on. I know that there's an extreme temptation to just write something. Well, turns out that you're not as good at this as I am. I'm telling you what to do. You're going to take 15 to 20 minutes and do nothing but plan. Now, I have to warn you, you have to be self-aware. I don't know if the proctor is required to tell you the recommended 15-minute period for reading is over. I don't know. Probably not. And if they are supposed to tell you, they probably won't. So you're going to have to be self-aware. Make sure wherever you're in the room that the clock is visible to you. Every student should be able to see the clock. If you cannot see the clock, ask if you can move your seat to a spot far enough away from everybody else where you can see the clock, okay? But I'm sure by now, if there was any issue with clocks or anything like that, I would have heard about it. So I'm sure that it's working fine. I've told you before, Mr. Lonia runs this very well. He knows exactly what he's doing. He knows how to run the ship. When it comes to picking out the groups, it's really important you do this because it's the only way to create a support system within the essay. Remember the essay's points that I want you to get. Thesis, which you need groups to do. At least one group needs to be in there. Context, you know how I feel about context. You have to do it in its own paragraph for your protection so you don't confuse it as part of the thesis and you ensure you've done it directly, okay? Again, that's not what you're going to see in practice essays, but take my word for it, it's for the best. 3, and the most important easy point, is to just describe 3 documents, which I'll show you how I would do that here now. The 4th point is the evidence beyond the documents, which again doesn't take much. A couple of sentences of information inserted in the right place, and you've got evidence beyond the documents. And finally, support, which is to go through all the documents, describe all of them, successfully link them to the topic sentences from your intro, and one more step, at the end of every body paragraph, just kind of summarize your topic sentence as you can see, these documents all demonstrate that Malvagno's got a great head of hair, something like that. If you do that, I'm going, of course we can, Abby, whatever you want to do. We can go over anything you want tomorrow, guys. If you're getting too tired and you can't do it no more, I get it. I'll be there as early as I can. I'm bringing Dunkin' Donuts, so I'm not bringing drinks, but I'll bring munchkins. All right, it's the best I can do. So if you're just burnt out, don't force yourself. There's no value to staring at something if you're burnt out. I will try to go over this again tomorrow. I will if you ask me to, okay? But to the question of grouping, there's no secret sauce. The simple fact of the matter is you need to read the groups calmly. The documents calmly and ask yourself, what are the main themes? If you want me to give you a method, here's what I would do. I'd read a document like this one here, and right under it I would write what effectively is the 1-sentence summary of the document, whatever you come away with. All right, so I was tutoring a student earlier today and I asked those students to read this document here, okay, and you can read it as I talk. And I actually was tutoring 2 students. They came away with the different summaries. One said basically, these workers were upset that they were not able to earn more wages because they were forced to work for the government. Another worker said these workers were not free to decide who to work for. These were two separate statements. They were both accurate, okay? So there isn't one right way. I need you to summarize this stuff. Thank you very much. I appreciate you too. I need you to summarize this stuff, all right? So what you want to do, and this is actually self-serving. I'll explain. This is not wasting your time. What you do is, in the space below the document, and you should do this for every document as you read it, write that one-sentence summary of what the document is. When you go to write your essay, you have to put a one-sentence summary of every document in your body paragraphs. All you're going to do is take what you write here and copy it into your essay. You follow? So you're actually, as you're planning, already writing one of the points of the essay. Okay, you're already doing it. You're just going to have to copy it again. No big deal. You're thinking once, not thinking twice. You're welcome. Now, as you do that, you're going to go through each document. I will tell you a few things. Number one, the documents tend to be in order. What do I mean by that? Well, if you go back to the question, let's scroll back up. You see it says Africa and or Asia. Typically, the stuff in Asia will all be together and the stuff in Africa will all be together. Okay, you'll see that. Like, they won't typically have document 1 is Asia, document 2 is Africa, document 3 is Asia. Typically not. So document 1 is Southeast Asia. Document 2 is India, which is, of course, Asia. Document 3 is Bengal, which is Asia, which is India still. Document 4 is, all right, that's Africa, that's Zimbabwe. Document 5 is Congo, that's Africa. Document 6, Zimbabwe, that's Africa. And document 7 is Tanzania, which is Africa. So you've got 3 Asian documents, 4 African documents, and they were in order. Asian, 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 African, African, African. You'll notice that when there are multiple topics like that, they tend to be together that way. Now, that doesn't mean document 1 and 2 and 3 should be a group. It does not mean that. In fact, that's the harder part. Okay, Abby, hang tight. I'll answer that in a second because that is a very important question. So hang tight. So when you're summarizing these documents and you write your summary here, you're then going to go to document 2. Read it, do your best to understand it, write a summary here. So one sentence. Document 3, I know it gets a little tight. Write the summary up here. You can write all over this booklet, by the way. Do not feel like you can't mark it up. Highlight, you can't highlight, but you can underline and all that. Bring a blue and a black pen. Having 2 colors might help you. You can use one as like a highlight color if you want. All right. Obviously, the test is printed in black. You may want to use blue for a highlight color, okay? Document 4, you have space down here. And write the summaries out. Yes. Abby, I'm getting your question now. You do need a single sentence summary for each document. Yes, you do. Watch now. I'll show you how you do this, okay? Crapola documents. Google Docs. Okay. Here we go. Here is the format for how to write a body paragraph for the DBQ. All right. So, in fact, if you watch carefully, this is going to be very useful. I can't do this in class tomorrow, so wake your friends up if they want to see it because I can't do this on a whiteboard. Okay. Here is what an essay looks like. We'll do DBQ first, and then we'll do LEQ second. I'm going to up the font. Okay. We indent. This is America. Now, something like this. When it comes to the relationship of Asher and Melissa, it is clear that although they were both at fault, Asher has the larger amount of responsibility for their breakup. Now, in terms of real questions we ask, right, it would be evaluate the extent to which Asher is responsible for the breakup. And you would say, during the high school years of Asher and Melissa, Asher is largely responsible for their breakup. Make sure that extent is in there, right? I'm just throwing an introduction together here. Then I would have a paragraph of context. High school, can be a trying experience for any young person. The first flutters of the human heart can undo even the most steel-faced human. Inevitably, however, we are all simple creatures, and bad stuff happens. Okay? Next. That's my context. Whatever. Next, body paragraphs. Here's how you do it. My thesis is not a thesis. It's just an opinion. Because I don't have any reasons why Asher's at fault. I need the groups. So, what would those groups be? Back to the introduction. This is because Asher was too immature. This is probably a very bad color to make you read on a screen, isn't it? I'm sorry. Let's go with dark blue. Okay. This is because Asher was too immature to recognize his responsibilities as a boyfriend. And he didn't care enough about Jane's life. No, what was her name? Melissa. Melissa's lifelong academic outcomes. Now, what I want to do, watch me do this. I'm going to take this one and change the color to dark green. I'm going to take this. That's not really dark, is it? Oh, man. I don't know anymore. It all looks black and white right now because Mom fried. I'm going to take this one and I'm going to make this one dark red. Okay? What am I doing? I'm showing you I have two groups. All right? I don't remember the documents. I do remember them, but you may not. Don't worry. Just work with me. I'm grouping based on, I wrote these one-sentence summaries, and I'm now looking where are their thematic links. For example, if the first document, that actual DBQ we were looking at, says workers didn't have any right to choose, so they were forced to work for the government. And another document says the government would maim and kill us if we didn't harvest enough rubber. A theme could be government mistreatment of native peoples. That's a theme. In this case, they don't let them choose who to work for. In this case, they cut their legs off. Like, they might be different extremes, but that's a reasonable theme. I just invented that. Anyone could invent the theme. So those groupings are based on those themes, okay? Now, I will take this topic sentence, and I will bring it down here. Now, I'm cutting and pasting it, but I don't actually want to fully cut and paste it. What I want to do is create the topic sentence as the group as the topic sentence of this paragraph. So, a major contributor. No, let's not go crazy. Don't even write that way. Asher was mostly at fault for the breakup because he was too immature to recognize responsibilities as a boyfriend. That's me taking the topic from the grouping, from the intro, dropping it into as a topic sentence in my paragraph. I now will do the following. Okay, pay close attention. This is what you do with every paragraph in the body. I'm going to zoom in here, all right? We're going to get closer. There we go. What's the question? How many minimum groupings should we have? I would rather say how many maximum groupings should you have. Have no more than 3. You can't do it. You want to have, here's the rule for groups. At least 2 documents in a group. No single group documents. Waste your time. 2 documents in a group. You're probably looking at 2 documents or 3 documents, and then another. You're probably looking at a 3-document group, a 2-document group, and a 2-document group. That'll get you all 7. All right. Probably what you're looking at, wouldn't it? 3, 5, yeah, 7. That'll get you all 7. So 3, 2, and 2. That may not work out. You might get a 3 and a 3. In which case, try to make like the 4th one fit somehow in the other documents, even if it's not the best fit. Try, because you really don't want to have a paragraph devoted to singly one document. It's just not worth it. Now, watch what I do. In document X, whatever number you want, blah blah says, or we can see, or the chart demonstrates something, okay? Says whatever, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K, blah, blah, blah. All right, period. In document Y, this is a different document, we can, or it shows blah, 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 blah. Okay, I got 2 of my group documents described. Now, what are these blah, blah, blah statements? These things here in black are you going to your prep, your planning on those document pages, taking the things you wrote and rewriting them here. I didn't plan anything, so I have nothing to write. You take what you wrote and you take that summary and you just insert it word for word, recopy it here. And do that for every document that you're putting in the group. You're just summarizing the documents. That's all you got to do. Now, technically speaking, by summarizing these documents right after putting in this topic sentence, you have created a marker for the reader that says these documents are part of this idea. I'll give you an example in real life. You have a binder, you're told to get dividers. English, math, social studies, whatever. If you put something in the math section, I presume it's associated with math. You put something in the English section, I assume it's associated with English. This is the point. So by putting these topic sentences from the intro into the paragraphs of the body, you are creating reference points. This is sort of automatically support. If you want to seal the deal, here's what I would do. I'm now going to go back to green. Oh God, I'm looking at that screen. I shouldn't. That's my stream screen and it's 7 seconds behind. I'm going to get myself crazy doing that. What the hell are the colors? Okay. Go back to green now. And I would say, these documents clearly demonstrate that Asher was too immature to maintain a relationship. Why green? Because I'm basically saying the same thing I said in the topic sentence. I'm just rephrasing it. Yeah? That's all I'm doing. Now, what would happen at this point? At this point, you would repeat this template for every body paragraph. You would just repeat it with different stuff. So now I'm going to go take the red point I made in the introduction here, okay? He didn't care enough about Melissa's lifelong academic outcomes. Okay, cool. So let's go to this, and we say, Asher also didn't care enough about Melissa's lifelong academic outcomes. And now, at that point, I go back to my document prep where I wrote those summary sentences, and I insert in document Z, in document Q, in document R, whatever the numbers are. And yes, write in document number. I don't care what anybody on the internet tells you. I've shown you the answers on the AP tests. You can look at them yourself where these things get points, and they're the way the graders want it. Graders want their job to be easy. They don't want you to be clever. They want you to be an easy person to grade. Trust me, make them happy. So at this point, I know I spelled something wrong there. You would basically repeat this stuff just with the new documents you're putting in here. So like you'll notice I'm going to slap these in, and I'm just going to change in document. I don't know, I just need another letter Z, and in document Q, it shows blah, blah, blah. Whatever it is, this is the stuff you've already written. You're just copying it over, okay? So you have to do new thinking. You're just copying it over from the spaces between the documents where you did those summaries, which helped you create the groups in the first place. And then you come back to enter in the support statement here. And that support statement will be something like, Asher demonstrated no real care for Melissa's grades, and as a result, this broke down their relationship. Okay? You need to use all 7 documents. Now, I'll tell you why. Just stick with me for a minute. Let me finish my point. There is one more rubric point that we're trying to grab here. So far we've demonstrated thesis and context. We've demonstrated the idea of summarizing documents. We've demonstrated the idea of supporting documents by having these topic sentences sort of in each of the paragraphs that are related to the prompt. Point number 5, which is one of the easier points actually, is evidence beyond the documents. What do? You have 2 options. Option 1. You read all the documents and you notice a document that references something you know but doesn't go into detail on it. And you know more detail. That's adding to the document. That is an option. Option 2. There is nothing in the documents you know more about, but you do know about related stuff from history, even if it's from other parts of the world or even other times in history. That's the invention of new information. You're bringing it in from outside. That would be another option. In either case, the place to stick this information, where do you put your outside information? Your outside information should go, I'm out of colors, let's go with mauve or purple, whatever it is. Hi, this is the place you would put your evidence beyond the documents. It would probably be 1 or 2 sentences, and you would only do this one time in the paper. Do not do this more than once. There is no bonus points for extra info. Peace. So, that's the spot where you would stick your outside information. It wouldn't even be as long as what I wrote, probably. And it would just be in one place. You wouldn't do this in every paragraph, just one time. Okay, one time on the place you're going to do it the best. Once you've done all that, you have the potential of a 5-point essay. The only points left are sourcing, which the juice is not worth the squeeze, and I will not spend time on it here. I'm sorry. I don't think it's worth your time. I think it will detract from your ability to score points here and from the time you need to score points on the LEQ. In addition, there's the fancy point, which, again, if you're pursuing that, I've got a bridge to sell you. No problem. How many documents do you need to use? So here's the basics. The rubric says 2 spots where the number of documents is referenced. The first is in description, which is the summary of every document. You have to do that successfully 1, 2, 3 times only, which means you're going to do it 4 times, because if one of these are wrong, you want the backup, okay? However, to get the support point, which you're working on anyway with this format, you need to have 5, 6 documents, okay? But since there are only 7 documents, you're going to do all of them, because if any of these other ones is wrong, you've got the backup, okay? So that's why you're going to do it. I just got to turn the screen and watch myself doing spirit fingers over here. Okay. Got jazz hands going on. I know you already said, but I missed. How many groups do you recommend? I would recommend no more than 3. Probably, and definitely no less than 2. 2 would be hard. You have to get 4 documents and 3 in 2 paragraphs. That's a lot. But probably 3 is the magic number of groups. Okay, that's the same number of body paragraphs you're going to end up having. All right, who else? What else? I got 7 minutes left in me before I just decide to go and lie down on the floor here. All right, I will sit here for 7 minutes and just kind of veg and stare at the screen and watch my eyes burn out. If you're done, whether physically or mentally or both, and you just can't do no more, do not carry on. I personally, if you want my 2 cents, if you were my son or daughter, I would tell you quite simply, take your ass to bed and go to sleep. There's nothing you're going to be able to do at this point tonight that's going to change any great shakes about tomorrow's test. If maybe one little piece of what we went over tonight sticks, cool. But you're not even going to know if it sticks because it needs time to go from short-term to long-term memory. So for now, you might as well just give your brain a break. The best thing you can do to be ready for tomorrow is a good night's sleep. LEQ rubric refresher. Of course, I can absolutely do that. That's not a problem. In 7 minutes is sufficient. Let's do that. Could you get the still points and if you only have time for 2, but get all the there's no minimum number. Back to the DBQ. There's no minimum number of groups that the test does not require grouping. I want to be clear. There's no point for grouping. This is just the best method to get to the topics that are required to get support. All right, it's just a method. It's not required. But so if you could have them all in one group if you can pull it off. I mean, I don't know what that would look like, but theoretically it could be done. All right, LEQ rubric. Okay, here we go. This is the official LEQ rubric. Okay, number 1, thesis. Now, like the DBQ, you need 3 parts to have a thesis. Part 1, direct response to the prompt. Evaluate the extent to which Malvagno still has some hair. Answer the question. Malvagno largely does not have any hair anymore. Okay? But 2, you need time and place. Now, time and place is almost always automatic because you're going to copy a lot of information sort of right out of the question. So if I pull up one of these questions as an example, here's an LEQ set. You'll see what I mean. Whoa, Jesus. Sorry. So if I look at number 3 here, develop an argument that evaluates the extent to which military conflict or conquest was the main cause of religious change in this period. Well, what period is it? Well, it's 1450 to 1750, and it's a global issue. Okay, so I would write a thesis that goes, the first sentence I write would be, in the period circa 1450 to 1750, I'm just copying the dates off of there, the extent military conflict or conquest was often a main cause of religious change in this period, often being a degree of extent. You could have said was a major factor of change in this period, was a large, whatever. You see my point. That's how you write the opener of the thesis. That accomplishes 2 of the 3 needs for a thesis. You got your statement, that's a direct response, and you've got your time and place. Now, you also need your groups. Now, there are no groups in the DBQ. Sorry, there are no groups in the LEQ. Instead, we have categories of investigation, which is actually the same thing. You're just inventing them, all right? So let's take this question. The extent to which military conflict or conquest was the main cause of religious change in this period. So I would have to come up with ways in which I could examine this topic on a smaller level to make an argument about what I think. Let's say I do think that conquest was a major part of religious change in the period, okay? So I now have to say to myself, all right, where the hell am I talking about? Like, what am I talking about exactly? And let's say I'm going to go with the years 1450 to 1750. I'm going to say this is Spanish New World, conquest by Spaniards, the Aztec conquest, let's say, the conquest of Peru by Spaniards. In this time period, I can't do Mongols. They're already done. So we're looking at Europeans, okay? And I'm going to look at them conquering in this region of the New World. I find it's the simplest thing to talk about. It's pretty straightforward, and the religious changes are very obvious. So that's what I'm going to go with. Now, having made that decision, what elements of that activity am I going to select to have a deeper discussion about? The answer is it depends on what I know. But let's say I'm going to go with something real simple. I'm going to focus on the impact of disease on changing religion and culture, the efforts of missionary peoples, and the effects of modern education systems on local peoples. That's what I decided to do. Maybe you won't think of all 3. By the way, in the LEQ, since there's no documents, there's no real hard-coded number as to how many groups you need to make here, how many topics you need to make here. You can make 1 or 2 and get away with it if they're really well done. You probably don't even need 3, but 3 is helpful in case 2 is wrong. Anyway, if I were to write this essay, I'd have a paragraph of context, and I'd talk a bit about why Europeans came to the New World in the first place, what they were trying to achieve, and that would be my context. Then when I get to the body paragraph, I'd say something like, okay, the military conquests of the New World by the Spanish were a critical factor in the change of religion. That's it. There's my topic sentence. I would then describe why I thought that. The Spanish arrived in force with the intent of extracting resources and wealth. Many of these conquistadors were actually desperate human beings from Europe who had no better prospects and therefore joined up on this sort of voyage. I could talk about how military conquest had actually forced the Aztec society upon their neighbors, which made it possible for the Spanish to turn around and make allies with those neighbors and then destroy the Aztecs in return. In addition, this ended Aztec religious practices like human sacrifice to be replaced with festivals that are Christianized but still honor Aztec traditions, such as the Day of the Dead in Mexico. I mean, this is just me making it up off the top of my head, but this is the kind of thing that you'd have to write about. And I would say what I just said is about enough in terms of detail to kind of get your point across, and that's it. You've done that paragraph, okay? Don't try to I would expect, and they expect, the LEQ to be much shorter than the DBQ. You don't have to replicate the existence of document information to assist you. That's unnecessary. What else can I say about the LEQ? Oh, the rest of the map, the rest of the rubric, sorry. Context is, again, the same. Evidence, so the supporting piece where you have these topics and you put them in, you talk about them, that's a big part of the support. I'd say you have to spend a special attention to the skill you're doing. Now, some prompts, I'm not going to lie, are not particularly clear about which skill you're actually doing. You know, some are going to be very clear about this is change or it's a effect or whatever. Some will be very obtuse. Whatever you're doing, make sure you say one of these words by name. Change or continuity, similarity or difference, cause or effect. Say one of them by name in the essay. This shows the effect of. This shows the causes of. Hey, this is different than from that. Make sure you are doing a skill. You don't have to actually do the specific skill they ask, as long as you can still fulfill the needs of the DBQ. But often they will give you a very strong hint as to what skill you want to do, and that's the one I would go with, all right? Okay. Anything else I can help with right now? Like I said, it's 10:01. I'm personally kind of unable to see much anymore. But if there is more, I'm happy to keep going. I'll just stay liquored up on tea here. Okay. Well, 11 of you made it to the end. Congratulations. I'd offer you extra credit on the AP exam, but I don't have that kind of power. So in the meanwhile, I wish you luck, but I don't believe in it. Get some sleep. Have some breakfast. Come refreshed and awake. Do not stay up all night. Do not freak out. It's just a test. Life will go on. You're not getting married tomorrow. You're taking a test, okay? And I'll see you then. All right, guys. Have a good one.